Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'll give you, where's my comment box? I will flick you through. No, I'm not going to do that. Apologies, I'm flicking you through the wrong thing. I'm going to flick you through the link for the Google site.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, it's so annoying, it's not doing it. Come on. At some stage, it will actually play the game I want it to. Let's go. Yeah. There we go. Okay, so has that popped up in the corner?
Yeah. Click that.
Yeah, click onto that, and I will also share my screen. So Jeanette gave us some homework, and it was to actually talk about constructive alignment, or it was actually a flipped classroom scenario where you were reading about constructive alignment. Did you manage to have a go at that, Michael?
No, I haven't seen it.
You haven't? No, fair enough. That's absolutely fine. We'll talk through. You'll see on the screen now that there is a diagram that breaks down constructive alignment. And what constructive alignment actually
Oh, yeah.
is it's thinking about three parts when you are creating your course, creating your assessments, and creating your activities. So we're guided by our learning outcomes,
Mm-hmm.
and we're really guided by the verb, which is the first part of the learning outcome. So
Yeah.
you'll see, our learning outcomes will say, show
Mm-hmm.
5 ways of, presenting a discussion. They'll say, describe 10 things needed for your mortar mix. So that first verb is hugely important within our learning outcomes.
Right.
Next, off to the left-hand side, it's talking about the teaching and learning activities. So
Mm-hmm.
with those teaching and learning activities, if our learning outcome is described, then we're, looking at the theory and teaching our learners how they're going to describe that learning outcome. If
Yep.
our learning outcome is apply, apply is quite a tricky one, and in fact, it actually, you need to have that knowledge as well as the skill to be able to apply. So we're kind of really
Mm.
looking at, what the students need to know to be able
Yep.
to apply that skill. So you're developing all your activities to match. And then the last one is our assessment tasks.
Mm-hmm.
So, there's no point if all our learning outcomes ask you to describe and identify, and then we come up with this fantastic practical scenario that all our learners are doing is showing something because they're doing it in a practical situation.
Yep.
So the whole idea with constructive alignment is that we're really making sure that all of our teaching and learning activities align to our learning outcomes, and all of our assessment tasks are aligned to our teaching and learning activities and aligned to our learning outcomes.
Right.
So it's a quite a simplistic triangle that,
Yeah.
with what you're doing at the moment, especially with, the year 2 of stonemasonry, is,
Yeah.
is that picture is just in your head the whole time. So you're going back and really checking and rechecking and just making sure that you're, matching your learning outcomes to your activities, to your assessment tasks, and making sure that you're ticking those boxes the whole way through.
Yep.
So, now
Just
with
just
um,
drawing the triangle.
yeah, oh yeah, fantastic. With assessments, there is so much terminology around assessments. I mean, you kind of think when you actually get into, um, learning and teaching, or get into education, there's a whole different language surrounding education, and then kind of under that umbrella and within, there's a whole pile of terminology around assessments.
Right.
So when I run this workshop face to face, I give everybody, a chance. I cut all these up and give everybody a chance to, pull them out, have a think about, individually have a think about what each one might be, and then, discuss with the person next to them, and then we discuss as a group. So, these are some of the words that will come across, when you are writing your assessments or you are looking at your moderation, your pre-moderation and your post-moderation, or your quality assurance checks. So your accuracy, and validity. Your accuracy really checks whether the assessor has used the assessment schedule. So it's kind of thinking, if you're doing your practical and you've got your marking rubric for stone veneer, but you don't refer to that, so you just mark them. It's what I feel on the day. Not too worried whether they actually haven't put any of the mortar in place and it's just hanging in there, or they haven't sort of put any separators in place. So you need to make sure that that you as the assessor, that you've used the assessment schedule, that you've recorded the results, and that you've made your judgment statements accurately.
Right.
The validity ensures that the assessor has measured what was supposed to be measured. So, again, that the student is actually meeting the tasks that you've given them within the assessment. With things being appropriate, and Michael, don't take notes, because I will send everybody out an explanation of these words as well.
Right. Okay.
So with it being an assessment being appropriate, it's that the methods and the conditions are, again, this is more your constructive alignment, are actually appropriate to the learning outcomes that are being assessed. Authentic is that, it is your student. So this is something that your student, doing an assessment. This is something, that actually we were talking about the other day. You're there on site watching your students do the practical. So, with sometimes, students might be completely away off site and might send photos through or a video through, and you're not actually sure if it's them that's done the work or not.
Yeah.
So it can be quite tricky.
Yeah.
Cluster groups is more when it comes down to doing moderation. And you probably haven't, yourself been through a lot of moderation processes yet, and your assessments that are being, currently written will go through a pre-moderation. So we know that, they're valid, that they're written to the right level for your student, the level 4, that they're aligned, that they're actually assessing what they should be assessing, that they haven't gone off onto a tangent.
Right. Yep.
And then at the end of the assessments, we may say to you, look, let's just pick one of your assessments for this year, and it might be veneer, and we'll get 3 students' work, your top student, your middle student, and generally a student that may have just missed, and we compare the marking. So we're making sure that your marking has quality to it, and you're marking to the same standards the whole way through.
Right.
So we'll, that's something that can be sort of sorted out, at a later point. It's quite a nice checking and rechecking. I always used to quite like my assessments going off to moderation each year, because it just sort of makes, that you are on the right track, that you are consistent with your marking to every student.
Okay. Yep.
Competency-based. So I think you were last year, yours was competency-based, wasn't it? The assessment. So they were either competent or not yet competent.
Right. Yeah.
And so now we're moved to criterion referenced, which is further down the list. So that basically there's a fixed set of predetermined criteria, and the students know what they're expected to do prior to the assessment.
Yeah.
So conditions of the assessment are things that might be usually sort of on the front page and tells how the assessment will take place, and it might be things like, it's a closed book, or it's an open book, that it's an assignment, that it's an observation, that it's a project. And those are, as you and I have gone through assessments, that's exactly what has been on the front page of the boards, and you know exactly what they're doing, not guessing.
Yeah.
Consistency, and that's what we talked about before with marking. So, with some of your, say with the theory ones, when you've got that marking schedule, the model answers. So if you were sick, somebody that wasn't a stonemason would be able to come in and mark it, because, there's a very clear criteria of what is being looked for with each student's answer. Fear that, none of the methods that we're using are going to disadvantage everybody, that everybody is going to be able to meet the assessments, that the assessments are manageable, that, that they're set in a time frame that's convenient and straightforward, and they're not going to interfere with the whole learning process. Another one, that they're open and transparent, is that, students are informed in a timely manner, generally at the start of each course, which is why your information goes up on Moodle about assessments, of, when their assessments will be, when they're held, and what will be in them. The other one that we've got here is observation and valid observation. So two different things, really. So observation is where, there might be a list of things that you're looking for. So student comes in, sets down, site set out, tick, sets out their profiles, tick, sorts out a mixing station, tick. But then a valid observation is that, you've got an explanation of exactly what is happening, because you are able to write notes. So it's having that checklist that is supported by notes. So, another assessor coming in or another person coming in can determine whether they would make the same assessment decision. So it's actually, just rather than a tick box, you've got another row down the side of your observation marking sheet that will actually give you the ability to write notes. So you might say, student came in and did a site risk assessment, but missed out that there was a hole in the ground 2 feet away that stuff would run into. I don't know, something.
Yeah.
Something.
Yeah. Yeah.
So they are just some, common terms that are just good to have on hand. Oh, I missed out naturally occurring evidence.
Right. NOE.
NOE. That's one that trips up a lot of people as to, what actually is naturally occurring evidence. Have you ever heard of that term before?
No.
Okay. So some people get it a little bit confused with practical, but, with a practical assessment in your situation, especially with veneer, you're saying, right, I am assessing you, I'm building a veneer wall on such and such a date, and so, they come in, they know, they're prepared. Whereas naturally occurring evidence, it might be that we've been teaching a retail course, and the assessment criteria is that the person needs to go up and meet a customer, needs to show them some product, needs to close a sale, and needs to, work the till. And so as an assessor, you would go into the shop and sit there and watch her on the floor and mark her as she's dealing in her own environment.
Right.
Yeah. So it could be also, if you were marking a second year student, you could be going up and observing them while they're, in their work environment, and assess them doing particular tasks while they are just doing their day-to-day.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yep.
Right. So it's a good, really good way of assessing, but it's not feasible for every single course.
Okay.
Right. What do we want? We go back to our constructive alignment, and we had another wee game that we can play. And again, when I've got a group of people in the room, I've got a whole pile of verbs that are cut up, and so we pick out a random verb, and then just have a think and have a discussion about how you would assess that verb. So it could be any one of these that fall under Bloom's taxonomy. And you've worked with Bloom's before, haven't you?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it could be any of these verbs that do fall under Bloom's taxonomy, and just have a think about, what are some ways that we could assess, let's say, identify. Oops, let me move. What are some ways that we could actually assess the word identify? And you've got identify in some of your courses, haven't you? You do.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I do.
What would be some ways that you would think, or you do currently, assess the word identify?
With pictures and an explanation.
Yeah. And also another one that you've got there is your multi-choice.
Right. Oh, I see.
Yeah. So with your multi-choice can be a really good way of assessing identify, because it's that kind of first level of blooms, and we're really asking students just to remember and recall the information. So they're not having to formulate their own opinion, they're not having to examine it, they're not having to synthesize and produce it into a different format, or relate to a different context. So you can assess identify with multi-choice.
Okay.
Yeah. The difficulty with multi-choice is that it has to be done really well. You have to, because in situations where students have a resubmission, so they miss the first time round, so they've got the opportunity to resit the assessment. A multi-choice is quite an easy way of doing that. They might have been tossing up between 2 answers out of 4 and realised, laterally what one they've got wrong, so they can actually just go back and resit without actually having done any further study.
Yeah, I've seen that.
Yeah. So the way around that is, some courses that do have a multi-choice will actually have a whole different multi-choice assessment, for the resit, which is so it seems like a really simple way of assessing in multi-choice, but it can actually be a lot more work in the development side when you're creating it.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, those sort of, you get tripped up by them a little bit.
Yeah.
There's some other ones. There's the classic one, explain. You will actually see, if you did, go through in those times that you might need to fall asleep and need something to put you in that state, and you're reading Bloom's taxonomy, that you'll see that explain is actually on a lot of the levels.
Right.
And you kind of, and it's almost, there's very few words, very few of the verbs that do that, but explain sits across, almost the whole gamut. And the reason for that is that, it depends on the level of explanation that you want. So, you could be explaining something quite simple, like, I don't know, I've gone blank, how to apply icing on a cake, to thermodynamics of the atmosphere. So, it's that one word that actually does go across the whole board.
It's just describe and explain.
Yeah, and describes there. Yeah, describes there as well, definitely.
I see a lot of describing in my veneering assessment. No explaining.
No explaining. So generally, describing is a simpler version.
Yeah.
And explaining, does take that more, that greater cognitive process, and that, slightly deeper thinking to reach that level.
Right.
Depending on what the question is, but yeah, you've got a lot of describe in there.
Yeah.
So actually, I was thinking about that when I was looking at that veneer assessment today as well, and just sort of changing some of the verbs.
Oh yeah.
In it. So you can kind of sort of think, as you go through, right, what sort of, if we looked at argue, what sort of assessment activities could you use for argue? What would be anything that pops into your head?
For argue.
I don't know. It could be debate.
Oh right.
Yeah. Again, it could be a theory assignment where they have to, argue a point of view or argue a philosophy. So, Yeah, we've got illustrate, select. So there's, it's kind of just gets you thinking when you're writing learning outcomes. How on earth am I actually going to assess these? Am I using the right verb?
Yeah.
As you work through. And you'll end up, I think, the blooms that I sent out last week actually has some teaching activities. I kind of fiddle with it. Has some teaching activities that do match the verbs, and then some assessment activities off to the side that just sort of gives some prompt thinking about the same verbs, what you could do for assessment activities.
Oh yeah.
All right. Now the other thing, and I'm not gonna do this as a test, but I created a Socrative quiz. So I'll drop this down and see if I can find it. And we'll just talk about. Is that still being shared with you, Michael? That you can see the Socrative.
I'm on the terminology page.
Okay, go back to your. So shared screen. Have I still? Am I still sharing my screen with you, or are you on the page itself?
Oh, I've gone back to the triangle.
Right.
Constructive alignment.
Okay, let's look what Okay. Go back to the link session.
Yeah. Oh yeah, yeah.
So you'll see there's a constructive alignment quiz.
Yep.
Okay, so this is the same thing, and if there was a whole group of us, it would be quite fun to go through same thing that we did a couple of weeks ago and see how many.
Yeah, that's right. I remember that
one. So this one, learning outcome, land a plane in all weather conditions, and it's assessed through a 500-word essay. So would that be a fair and valid and way of assessing how to land a plane in all weather conditions?
No.
No, I agree with you.
I was just thinking, I met a man recently who lands planes on ice on the South Pole. He's a specialist. He'd probably write you a 500-word essay about it.
He probably would. And he'd probably have all sorts of anecdotal stories about how he's done it.
Yeah.
I don't really think I'd like my pilot only to be assessed through how to write rather than actually physically doing it.
No.
All right, well, what have we got next? Is it going to let me do it? Oh. All right. Show correct paddling operations for a moving water kayak and assess through naturally occurring evidence.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So this, most of these I've made up out of the top of my head, but this one I did take and steal from, I think it was an Australian course, and they take their students away for 5 days, and within that 5 days they this is one of the learning outcomes that they actually assess.
Oh, yeah.
All right, number 3, explain which economic and political factors contributed to the outbreak of World War II and assess through a multi-choice assessment.
Explain?
No. Identify or list, we could, but definitely not explain. Learning outcome, facilitate a group to achieve agreed upon goals and assessed through a final theory exam.
True? No.
Although, if you're facilitating your doing.
Right.
So it'd be another one that would need to be, because you've got to be there in front of the group and getting them to, so the examiner would need to see you've got the group and they're achieving. And last one, identify wavelength factors with hearing sound. Identify wavelength factors with hearing sound. assessed through a literary review of 500 words.
I don't know if it's true, is it?
No, identify. You'd only be pointing at it. You
Right.
could use your true, false, or multi-choice. But yeah, literary review of 500 words would be too long. And I've just actually realised in this whole thing I've got no falses, no trues.
Oh, right.
That was a bad choice of assessment examples. So everyone's waiting to be tripped up.
Yeah.
So So how do you feel now about constructive alignment, and then when you're moving through your program development and courses, about thinking about the learning outcome guiding your learning and teaching activities and guiding your assessment activities?
Yeah, I understand the process. Yeah, I haven't had much of a stab at doing it, but going forward, for sure.
Yeah. No, you haven't had much of a chance of doing it at the moment, but going forward you will in some of the, and especially with the D4LS process, and we really start looking at that capstone, that's when we'll be really pulling everything apart as to, what needs to go in. So you'll be throwing in this very soon.
Oh, good.
Yeah. I'm actually just going to stop this recording now. Thank you very much for letting us do that.